I've never done this live before. Hello and welcome to the Psychology Podcast. Thank you so much for coming live from the Comedy Cellar at the Village Underground. We're so glad you all came out. With our special guest today, we have Ricky Schlotz, who is a columnist with the New York Post and a fellow at FIRE. We have Jonathan Haidt, who is a professor at Stern, and co-author with Greg Lukianoff, who is president and CEO of FIRE organization, who looks super cool tonight. These are our special guests, and the topic on the table today is no big deal, very easy, simple topic that we'll sort out tonight. Why the last 10 years have been so fucked up? What is going on? I mean, is anyone not asking that question right now? Like, let's be honest, that is the question of the day in so many different ways. And we have such great perspectives on the table for this topic. So let me open it up, and let me just open that broadly right now. And there's so many things that can fall under the umbrella. Do you three just want to have any sort of opening statements on what you think might be happening before we get into the nitty-gritties of this?
Well, first, I just want to say, because a lot of people don't know, this is actually not a comedy act. Like, if you came here to see comedy, I'm sorry, because we're disappoint you. So we're like, we're going to talk about the things we've been writing about, and it's like really heavy and dark, but you came to laugh. So we'll try to make it funny, but there's only so much we can do.
Well, if we can't make the dark funny, right? There's a great comedian who said, if I didn't laugh, I would cry. And I feel that summarizes this 10 years.
Gallows humor tonight. Here we go. All right. That's my opening remark.
That's your opening remark? There are various topics to fall under that umbrella. I think a really big one is social media.
Oh, yeah.
You've all written and thought about this. Let's start with you, John, actually, because you wrote this fascinating article for The Atlantic saying we're basically in the fall of Babylon right now. Is that right?
Well, Babel.
Babel.
So
doesn't sound good, though.
So actually, it all started very suddenly in early 2014. When it seemed as though there was like a glitch in the matrix or a warp in the fabric of space-time.
Yeah.
And Greg picked it up first because he has his tentacles out in all kinds of campuses. So he was sort of just, he was like, weird stuff is happening.
Yeah.
I actually met Greg at a party. Jerry Orstrom introduced us. So Jerry is over there. I think Jerry introduced everybody here to everybody, actually.
That's true.
But it was like something started going weird. And I began to see it at NYU, and Greg had seen it. And so that led to this collaboration of writing up this article in The Atlantic, The Coddling the American Mind. And we thought that it was just a campus thing. And so to get to your question, it was like I guess campuses were like the Wuhan of sort of the current environment. And it came out on campuses, especially on the coasts in the upper Midwest. And from there, it spread. So we were writing, a book on this, the article in the book, and we were going to have a chapter at the end on when Coddling goes to work, like what happens in offices. Because we were beginning to hear in 2017 about Gen Z going into office, about your generation. So she's the exception. But we didn't have enough material. We just had anecdotes. So we closed the book down. I was so wish we had just made a chapter. Yeah. We just put the chapter title, and we said...
Because we knew it was happening.
Yeah, that's right. So we should have just put it, like, literally a blank piece of paper and said, see our website, we'll fill this in a year. But anyway, so it's the weirdness started there, but then it spread out to the rest of society. What was that weirdness, Greg?
Oh, what was the weirdness?
Yeah, how would you describe the weirdness?
Well, in order to be really funny, it's important to talk about 1521. About, like, the Tudor dynasty. And basically, what I'm getting at...
Anyone?
Yeah.
They're not drunk enough.
Yeah. I used to study free speech and censorship in the Tudor dynasty. And basically, the printing press happened in the 1450s. And it started creating all these problems. The witch trials increased. There was lots of political unrest. There was lots of religious blasphemy and heresy coming out of this awful machine. So in 1521, Henry VIII said, I have to approve everything that comes out of the printing press from now on. I feel, at the time, if you would think of the printing press as being this infernal machine that ruined everything. What an awful time to be alive. And I feel like we're in 1521 right now. That essentially we just created, back then, they created an invention that doubled the number of people in the global conversation. It expanded it by millions. We just expanded through social media the global conversation by billions. And of course it's going to be a crazy anarchical period. Like, basically, I think there's no way out of this being a crazy, stupid time. We just have to figure out our way out so it doesn't drive us all crazy and destroy our countries.
Is there hope? Is there hope? You know, Ricky, you are our resident Gen Zer, right?
Yes, I am.
You actually have an interesting backstory about this, right, with your experience at NYU. And
Yeah.
you talk a little about, you're on the front lines.
I was very much an eyewitness to everything that they were talking about in the Coddling of the American Mind, and I read it my freshman year. And I recognized like all these symptoms, these things going awry in my generation that I couldn't quite grasp like what was going on. The last 10 years that have been uniquely stupid have been like half my life at this point. So I read the book, and it just diagnosed like the root issues of like medicalizing speech and feeling that I'm unsafe because you say something that I don't agree with. And I saw all the consequences of that as an NYU student. Our freshman year, they give you your ID. On the back of the ID is 911, the campus safety number, and then the bias response hotline in case you're offended. And so, that really says a lot.
That's a real thing.
It's a real thing.
All across the country.
What happens if you call that number? You're like, I'm offended. Like, someone's trained to say what? Like,
so it goes
I'm so sorry.
it's a hotline. You report it to the
happens?
administrators.
Yeah.
You would know better than
I was there for the birth of the BRTs. Basically, like, universities tried to pass speech codes in the 80s, and they all got shot down in court, but they kept on building speech codes anyway that were very similar. But as they started getting shot down in court, they were kind of like, well, there's got to be another way to sort of like police student speech so that they don't offend. And the first time I saw this presented, it was a program, I think at Cornell or Syracuse, and they decided to police the dry erase boards on a floor, and they did like a whole experiment. And guess what? When students knew that adults were policing the floor, they wrote a lot more offensive stuff on each other's boards. And there was a story about them seeing they reported this with great seriousness. They found on an Asian student's door, someone had written, "I like rice." So they did what anyone would do. They called the police. And the police show up, and the student's kind of like, I wrote
rice
that.
too.
That was it. And it was really funny because like they were at such a loss to explain what happened, and they were kind of like, well, she was trying to tell people something about herself. It's like, no, she was making a fucking joke, people.
Wow.
Called the police, and this happens a lot.
That's intense. John, were you about to say you called the hotline once? Is that?
Oh, well, so
I feel like
I've actually called it several times.
Yeah.
Because I'm a professor at NYU, and I used to make jokes in my classes, and I stopped doing that in 2015 after all the craziness started.
Yeah.
But I realized, you know what? You can't know who you've offended because it has nothing to do with intent, it's nothing to do with objective content, it's all subjective. So you have no idea how many people you've offended. And so I'm trying to find out, do I have a record? Like, because if I know that I've got 7 complaints, then I'll, I guess go on the warpath and try to, make fun of NYU even more or something. But like, so what I need to know is, are they really keeping tabs on us and keeping records? Or is it just like they created it because of student pressure and now they're not really running it? Even still, it shouldn't be there. Yeah. So I've called them, I've emailed them. Those are 2 ways because I want to find out, but they won't return my call. So it's on my list of things to do to pretend that I'm filing a real complaint and make up something just to get them to call me.
Wow, they don't call you.
But the point is that the world is very, very different when there's a sword of Damocles over your head. In fact, I'm just listening to a podcast right now by Andrew Huberman on play, and play is almost defined as low-stakes contingency testing. You try things out, you get some feedback, and if it's negative, then you don't do that again. But instead, what if in play, if you make a mistake, you get a finger cut off? You only have 10 chances, and then you're done. So we wouldn't play very much if that was the case. And that's what's
That
happened
was
to us.
very
in class.
ableist of you, though, because some people don't have 10 fingers.
Hey, I'm the Fed. Yeah.
That was ableist.
Yeah. But yeah. But there you go. But that's the sort of thing that trips you up. Like you don't, if you say, like I was blind to that. I thought, oh, I can't say blind. Like so it's just very difficult to talk or teach when you have to watch every word.
I want to ask Ricky. So Ricky and I are working on a book called Canceling of the American Mind because I'm very creative with my titles, and it's about cancel culture. But I remember, we have the amazing interns at Fire, and they were so optimistic. And then I asked them what it was like growing up with social media in high school, and they all suddenly looked terribly grave. And I realized how much social media has undermined interpersonal trust. Because they can turn you into the crowd at any time. You could say something when you're drunk, when you're 15, and suddenly your life is ruined. So in terms of what the environment was like, what was it like being in high school during this time?
Yeah, it was pretty tough. I mean, teenagers dealing with the 2016 election, I was probably a sophomore in high school at that point in time. I would say that was my first little dabbling into what cancel culture looked like and people turning against each other in a life chapter where with social media, you get plugged in prematurely into the world's issues, but you should be worrying about acne and who you have a crush on. And, you have these kids who are children that are foisted into this political discourse way too young when they're just parroting what their parents say because they haven't really formed an idea of their own. And so it was definitely really tense. There was a lot of interpersonal strife. I feel fortunate that I'm an older member of Gen Z that wasn't really when I was 12, I wasn't on Twitter, thank God.
Oh, wow.
But
when did you get Instagram? When did you go on Instagram?
I was 11 or 12, I think, but very early. But that was in the early days of Instagram before it turned into the beast that it is now, I would say. I was posting pictures of the sunset and what I had for lunch. And, today it's here I am doing this and that. And I think that for younger girls, even just a few years younger than me, I'm more concerned for them than for myself.
Yeah, because I can actually add something that we didn't know when we wrote the Coddling. Which is that, so I'm writing so Greg and I are both writing books following up on this. The Coddling was mostly about the effects of overprotection, creating a generation. Coddling just means overprotection. It doesn't mean spoiled, doesn't mean lazy, it just means overprotected and therefore failing to develop anti-fragility. Yeah. And we had one chapter on anxiety, and we had a couple of paragraphs on social media because in 2017, the data wasn't clear that social media is harmful. There were correlational studies showing small correlations. And so after we wrote the book, we were challenged by various researchers. So I really got into this, along with Jean Twenge, digging into what are all the studies. And what I found is that if you look at all screen time for all kids, what you find is very small correlations. When you zoom in on social media for girls, they get much, much larger. Yeah. And what I've learned recently is when you zoom in on social media for girls between 11 and 13, it's much, much larger. The point is, girls go through puberty first, around 11 to 13. That's the age when they're most damaged by this. And even if you're just posting photos of you doing something, everyone's comparing themselves to everyone else, and we've got a sort of a thing in our brains. It's called the sociometer. It measures how am I doing? How am I doing? And if you see everyone else is going to these parties, they're doing more than you. That's not the average. That's their best. So anyway, all I'm saying is a thing we didn't know is that it's 11 to 13 for girls is the most important period to protect. We've got to get this stuff out of middle school. We really have to have a national movement to protect middle schoolers and let them play. They should just be playing and talking about acne and crushes or whatever. So yeah, that's a big piece of the puzzle as to why the students coming in 2013, 2014 were the first ones with this new attitude. That's what Greg noticed first.
No, it's great.
How many people in the crowd have actually read Coddling the American Mind? Okay, great. I was wondering if we had to explain it, but I guess we don't.
Can't see anything, but no, you have a lot of fans here. Something that really struck me, John, in what you've written is you trace some of this to 2011 when the invention of the like and share buttons. And I think that's a big part of the story here. Can you kind of talk a little about that?
Yeah, actually, it's a good thing to fill in. We sort of, you asked why. Yeah, good interview. Because we started off why have the last 10 years been so stupid? And so the simplistic narrative of progress is actually a bit like what Greg started with, not that you're simplistic, but just the printing press connected people, doubled, and then, the internet increased, increasing connectivity is generally a good thing, but it has some bad effects. Sure, that's the
Problems
story.
of progress.
Okay, But there's a twist to it, which I think is really what made it so tough, so nasty. So most of us here in the room can remember when you first encountered a web browser or social media or an iPhone or Uber. I mean, the technology was magical. It was incredible. It was godlike technology. And so this was the period of techno-democratic optimism from the fall of the Berlin Wall through the 90s with the internet and even then the smartphone and even early social media. We thought in 2011, like, wow, this is going to be democracy here on in. You know, liberal democracy won. Okay. The turning point, turns out, comes in 2009 when Facebook adds the like button, Twitter adds the retweet button, Facebook copies it with the share button. Suddenly, it's not just, hey, let me connect to you and let's talk. That was when we used to call these things social networking systems, social networking sites to connect people. That's good. But after these innovations, it became a competition to get stuff out, to get more likes and more shares. And putting in the retweet button makes everything go hyper-viral. If you remember from COVID days, which I guess maybe some people think we're still in, although very few people here are wearing masks, so I suppose this is mostly the libertarian crowd, perhaps. But,
I heard a libertarian woo.
But when things go hyper-viral, that's when it changes and we all are in danger all the time of someone saying something about us, there's no bottom. That's when it's no longer playful. Add to this the introduction of threaded comments, it's called, in 2013, which is, it used to be if Barack Obama posts something and somebody with 7 followers posts some terrible thing about him on the page, that's it. It's a stupid thing in a stream of 10,000 comments. But what Facebook said is, hey, what if we crank up engagement by letting people fight in the comments? And so now a stupid person with 3 followers is visible by everyone, and other people say, you're a racist, you're a moron, and then and before you know it, it's everyone fighting everyone. It's like those Westerns where suddenly everyone's crashing a chair on everyone's head. So it's 2009 to 2013 is when the platform changes, and that's why you saw those first, it was like a glitch in the matrix.
Really great point. And I also think it's, I could spend the whole night being like, great point, Jonathan, because I really do like a lot of the points you make, and genuinely. And you made a really good point that you don't really see it as a problem of tribalism, because, a lot of people will just jump to that and say, well, we're living in such a tribal age. You actually see it more as a divisiveness. And I think it's a really important distinction to make.
Yeah. Sure. So, a lot of my work, especially my book, The Righteous Mind, was on how we evolved to be tribal. And that's how humans live for millions of years. And that explains a lot about our religiosity and about our politics and about sports. So that's what I was thinking, all along. It's about tribalism and us versus them and polarization. And that started going up because of cable TV. Cable TV really did a lot to enhance tribalism. What was new with social media was, yes, it does enhance tribalism. It certainly makes it easier to have a sense of us versus them. What social media did, which Fox News and MSNBC never did, was it fragments everything. It breaks apart everything so that everyone's fighting with everyone, even on the same team, and there's no possibility of a shared story. Even on the left or on the right, there's no possibility of a widely shared story. So social media, so to have a large, secular, diverse democracy is sort of like a thing that should never exist. It should not be stable. But we did it, and it was stable for a while, if you get the parameters exactly right. And what I've been trying to argue recently is, social media after 2009, it's like we took those parameters and we changed them. We're now so far out of the balance of sustainability that I don't think we're going to make it unless we can get back into sustainability.
I don't know where the Overton window is right now. It's very, I don't know if people are familiar with that phrase, but, the window of acceptability in a society. Now I feel like, I don't know, does anyone know where the Overton window is right now? Like, raise your hand and let us know, because I don't, it seems like everything is, all the rules are out the window of decorum, of what we would think, even in like what a president could do, right? I don't want to get political, but it's just fascinating.
The Overton, that's a great point. The Overton window.
Thank you again.
No, it was about the Overton window shifts, but if what I'm saying is true about the fragmentation, then it's not an Overton window, it's just 1,000 shards of broken glass.
Well, that's even more troubling.
And if you're not, oh, wow, good metaphor. Wow, it's from Martin Gurry. I just took it from Martin Gurry, who wrote Revolt of the Pope.
Great book. Yeah, I've been calling it the Overton peephole for a little bit because it's just so easy to get in trouble. And meanwhile, one thing I do want to focus on is talk a little bit about what me and Ricky are working on in the next book. I actually wasn't a big fan of the term cancel culture, but then we did our studies on it. We have a great research department at FIRE now. We got Sean Stevens in the audience. And what we found was that a black, white, Democrat, Republican, everybody's terrified of cancel culture. Everybody knows the term. So if we didn't use that term, we'd be leaving most Americans out of the discussion and trying to make, I don't know, like Jason Stanley at Yale happy, which you'll never accomplish. But one of the main things about the book that we're trying to convey is the numbers are kind of astounding. That essentially we're getting close to 900 attempts to get professors fired, with about more than 200 of them actually getting fired or forced to step down. Many more than that actually sanctioned in some way or actually censored, in a situation where there's very low viewpoint diversity among professors in the first place. I went on Dr. Phil, which was weird, which was very surreal, and I pointed out that the best research shows that during McCarthyism there were about 100 to 130 professors who were fired from 1947 to 1957 for being communists. We are way past that number now, and I got called out in Media Matters, being like, that can't possibly be true. It's like, no, actually the numbers, they are literally greater.
Yeah, and I think on the topic of cancel culture, one thing that's often overlooked as the adults in the room kind of discuss the issue is what it's like coming up in that age.
Oh, man.
And being a teenager.
Don't envy you.
Yeah, and being a teenager and you're supposed to fuck up and fumble and do the stupid things and make the mistakes and not have that be in the permanent record, and have grace from your friends and have compassion from the people around you. And unfortunately, there's a whole age of people who are growing up self-censoring. That's just all they've ever known. And I think that for even just people a few years younger than me, I've seen it even worse. And I hear horror stories from parents who their middle schoolers are caught up in that. And it's hard to even imagine.
Well, Ricky, tell us about political identities or political conflicts as you're growing up. Because I read recently that sort of consciousness of politics and opinions about it and getting active in it used to be something that juniors and seniors in high school did, or there was some age at which kids would begin to do it, and now it's pushing down to around 11 or 12. That's what I read. Did you see that? And were you a political minority, or were you was there a majority? Tell us about that.
Yeah, I would say that definitely started around freshman year of high school for me, which felt a little premature. I wasn't super politically involved. I was always more right-leaning, and so a little bit of an outsider on my campus, which kind of made me feel like an underdog, which is something that I shook ultimately, but I'm sure that there are a lot of young people who feel the same and are supposed to identify with a group or a tribe, I think, before it's even healthy. I mean, my politics, I've been writing for 2 years now, and they've changed considerably. And I look back and there are some things that I'm like, I mean, I don't agree with that anymore, and I've changed and evolved as a person. And so it's a little unfortunate to see people who are 14, 13, dedicating themselves to a path and a tribe and going down echo chambers on social media. And so I think it's really something that's concerning to me.
I have a causal question, because I'm wondering how much of this do you think is causing the mental health crisis we're seeing among young people right now? I mean, I'm a professor. I see it firsthand. I see the very high levels of anxiety among my students, the high levels of stress, and I have noticed a significant increase since I've been teaching 15, 20 years. I see it very clearly. Do you think some of this is causally related to what we're seeing among high anxiety levels? Yeah.
Well, I'll take it, because this is exactly what my next book is on.
Amazing.
After we published the Coddling, I started collecting all of the studies I could, and the story's becoming very, very clear. When you graph out all the lines of rates of mental illness, especially anxiety and depression, they're all pretty stable in the early 2000s, and all of a sudden, in 2012 or 2013, they start going up, way up. And there's all kinds of revealing facts. So one thing is it's the exact same thing in Canada and the UK. And so people say, well, it was caused by the financial crisis. And I go, well, no, because then it would have started earlier and it would have gone down as the economy improved. And in Canada, they didn't really have a anyway. So it's not caused by those things. But here's another really important fact that it only became clear a year ago, the first publication. The lines first go up for girls on the left, and they go up the furthest. So girls on the left, really, they were like the canaries in the coal mine.
You're talking about politically?
Yes, girls. So there are very few studies of teenagers that asked for their politics.
Right.
But there are two data sets. But there are two data sets that did. And so one was the NSD, the National Survey on Drug Use and Health. They actually did, and they find that the liberal girls go up first, followed by conservative girls, and liberal boys followed then by conservative boys. And the liberal girls go up the most. And one possible reason is Tumblr. Tumblr brought people together not by the social graph of who you know, but it's a sort of a fan base thing of what you follow. So you get social justice Tumblr, which is the most perfect. It's like, you know how they achieved like nuclear fusion recently? So it's like imagine that. So the 3 great untruths of our book. So our book is based on the 3 worst ideas ever, which are what doesn't kill you makes you weaker. Always trust your feelings, and life is a battle between good people and evil people. So you take those 3 beliefs.
You'll be miserable if you believe these things.
So you put girls on Tumblr, and they get the 3 laser beams focusing in on them, and boom! So I'm sorry to make light of it, but so yes, we actually know from a lot of things, not just the correlational studies, but from experiments, it is causal. It is going on social media, especially for girls, especially when they're in middle school. It makes them depressed and anxious, and we don't know if it's permanent.
Yeah, I have to say from my anecdotal experience, there's a perfect causal link between my friends who were on Tumblr when they were tweens and the people who ended up struggling with their mental health. Like, almost perfect.
It's one of the things that the Coddling American Mind has succeeded beyond our wildest dreams. We thought we were just writing something that was common sense, and we're really proud of the fact that it's been influential and it's reached lots of people. But it is frustrating that it feels like we didn't actually we're not taking serious steps for one of the major premise, which is that we're teaching young people the mental habits of anxious and depressed people. So you should not be surprised that they're anxious and depressed. And adults are doing this, and in a lot of cases they're doing it because they want to motivate them to positive action, which is kind of cruel when you think about it. So I kind of wish, even though people are reading the book, I wish they'd actually that we'd stop actually disempowering. I actually wanted to call the book Disempowered. We're telling these bright people that they are fragile, that they're easily harmed, that they and that essentially they're living in a social situation that is hopeless.
You know, yes, feel free to applaud.
Let's hear for hopelessness.
I want to tell you what I struggle with this is, where is the line for coddling? I find myself alternating between 40,000 different states during the course of my professor class. But let's just focus on 2 right now. The two it is a lot, but the 2 main ones, I feel like I struggle. I feel immediate compassion, right? If I have a student call my office hour, they say, "Sorry, I haven't been able to hand in any of the papers all semester. I've been depressed," right? Yeah. My immediate is like, "Oh, that sucks," right? And I want to be there for them, and then that sort of instinct kicks in, and then it gets to a point where sometimes the student's like, "Oh, sorry, I didn't do anything. Sorry, I haven't done anything all semester." There's a point where I'm like, I'm starting to feel like I need to have a little tough love here. I guess my question is, where is the coddling line? Because I don't want to. Coddling almost feels sometimes like it's diminishing the reality of someone, and I know you guys don't do that. That's why I want to bring up this question, because for me, I feel like I struggle sometimes being like, I have genuine compassion, but I also think some of them have really maladaptive thinking patterns that I want to help them with as well.
Yeah. I have a 5 and a 7-year-old, and they're the best thing I ever did in my life. And it's just, I was so scared of having kids, and I had no idea it was going to be this fucking awesome. But I learned so much. I mean, my son Maxwell was actually born while we were writing the book, and it completely absorbed my life towards the end of the book. But I try to live what we preach, and I just want to give you an example of how I think about it, or how I actually try to live it. And it doesn't sound nearly as pernicious as the name Coddling. So when my sons are watching something scary on TV, and they tell me that they want to change the channel, that they want to watch, and I'm not talking about like slasher films. I'm talking about cartoons. And I'm like, listen, here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna sit next to you, and we're gonna watch this all the way to the end, and then when they get to the end, I asked them, was that as scary as you thought it was going to be? And the answer is always absolutely not. And then I just try to emphasize, a lot of times pain in life is created by the avoidance of pain. That essentially the thing that you're scared of is going to become the big scary bear, and you got to learn to face it. Otherwise, we're disempowering you. So I mean, that's just one thing that I do.
Yeah, and I would completely endorse that. But you get to choose what you do with your child.
Yeah.
Now, the problem, the situation professors are in, and actually just check. So in this room, how many of you are teachers or educators in some way? Raise your hand high. Okay, we have a bunch. Okay, and how many of you are managers or supervisors who have Gen Z employees? Okay, that's the first person I've ever heard applaud for that. I teach in a business school, and people are really having a lot of trouble incorporating Gen Z. They're having a lot of difficulty. So here's why the answer to your question is so difficult. Because each of us on our own might have an idea of what to do, but we can't stick our necks out unless we have backing from above. So what we have to do is you have to have the whole organization, whether it be the whole university or the whole company, have a sort of a common set of understandings. And so that's why we put actually chapter 1 of the Coddling online. If you go to thecoddling.com, right there on the front page, you find a link to chapter 1, which explains anti-fragility. And if you understand that idea, that what doesn't kill you actually makes you stronger with some limitations, we'll cover that.
Not always.
Yeah, not always. Sorry. Yeah, sometimes taking risks makes you dead, and that doesn't make you stronger. But we're not talking about physical risks here. We're talking about emotional risks. Anyway, my point is, it's almost impossible. It's difficult for any one person to solve this themselves, because if you give tough love, they could report you. And so none of we all make the same calculation of it's just not worth it, and I have so much other stuff to do. And so it's crucial. This problem cannot be solved by individuals. It has to be solved collectively by groups. So of course, what we recommend is that you buy copies of the Coddling for everyone in your university or your company. But short of that, just send them the link to the chapter. Get the discussion going. Because what I tell managers is, and what I tell Gen Z students is, if students go to your manager and say, you know what, I really want to be excellent in this job. I really want to grow. So please tell me what I'm doing wrong. Give me feedback. Because managers are afraid to give feedback to their Gen Z employees. And I've heard some say, especially to the women, which is terrible, because that means the women aren't going to grow as fast as the men. So you have to have a common understanding of anti-fragility, and then you have to have a two-way communication about strength and growth. And in that way, you can create pockets of rationality in institutions.
Yeah, and I would say, in terms of my generation's probably least flattering attribute in the workplace is the fact that we jump to HR and we're always ready to report. And I think that's rooted in having always had parents watching us when we're playing together and then we tattle, or having a bias report hotline when we go to college and there's someone to tattle. And so we're always externalizing these interpersonal conflicts and looking for somebody else or a third party or a figure of authority to adjudicate things for us. But in a corporate workplace, that's for you as two people to figure out. But unfortunately, managers are being put in that position by young people.
And that's what you just said. That's the very definition of what's called moral dependency. Moral dependency is when you don't solve moral conflicts on your own, you learn to appeal to someone else to punish him. And that's what makes it difficult to work with.
Are you all worried about mob mentality?
Oh,
is that something that you're
absolutely.
concerned about? Can you talk a little bit about that and how you see it play out on social media? How you see entire lives be ruined doing this? Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's what the book Canceling the American Mind is ultimately
I
about.
know I passed you a softball. I know.
And what's been happening on campus? I mean, I've been working on campus since 2001. I was the weird lawyer who specialized in First Amendment law. I worked at the ACLU of Northern California. Studied Tudor dynasty censorship. Like, this is why I was put on this earth, even though I'm an atheist. I feel like that's my mission in life. And 2001, I was already surprised at how easy it was to get in trouble on a college campus, and how much worse things have gotten since 2014, and particularly in 2020. Scares the shit out of me, like genuinely. And what scares me even more is looking at a playing field where you've got people claiming to like free speech, like Elon Musk, and I'm making it look great. And then at the same time, there's been this sort of what I call it the slow motion train wreck. That I could see it when I was at the ACLU in '99. That there was an attempt, a deliberate attempt by some thinkers, to switch the political balance of free speech, which was a core liberal idea, to actually be what the bad guys say. And that's actually really taken root. Now, on the other side, there used to be more libertarian influences in the Republican Party. Now, with people like Sohrab Mahmoudi and Adrian Vermeule, you're having like a real turning against freedom of speech from both sides. So we're a little freaked out.
Yeah, I think it's there. You go. That table there. They liked it.
Thank you.
Yeah, should be freaked out.
You know what I want to talk about comedy right now. Can we shift it to comedy?
I want to be grave.
You, Greg, you were executive producer of a awesome documentary. I loved it, called "Can You Take a Joke?" Along with Noam Dorman, who we want to give a huge shout out.
Is Noam
here?
here?
He's owner of the Comedy
This is his
Cellar.
club. Let's hear it for the
I
Comedy
think he's here
Cellar.
tonight.
Woo!
Thanks for letting us do this,
With
Noam.
Noam Dorman, they're like the center of the universe.
Yeah. But I love this documentary, and I love this idea. Where a lot of comedians don't feel comfortable going on college campuses right now, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of professors don't feel comfortable going to college campuses right now as well. What's in common between these two things?
Yeah. Well, the problem
So do you like that? Yeah.
with Can We Take a Joke? Actually, raise your hand if you've actually seen Can We Take a Joke?
It's on Netflix, right?
I'm still really proud of it. And this came directly out of the Comedy Cellar. This was inspired by Noam Dworman. My first book was called Unlearning Liberty, warning about we're teaching young people bad habits for living in a free society. That kind of panned out, which came out about 10 years ago. But nobody listened to me. So we did it. So I did a podcast here, and Lee Camp, who kept on emphasizing he was the most far left person on the panel, actually said towards the end of the podcast, I don't like playing campuses anymore because you can't use your good material. And I was like, even the so-professed farthest left person doesn't want to play them anymore. So we started doing this little projects, basically making the argument that Lenny Bruce would not survive 5 minutes on the modern college campus. And we made this documentary. I'm super proud of it. The only problem is it came out in 2015. We didn't even have a word for cancel culture. We got Adam Carolla in it. We got Penn Jillette in it. Gilbert Gottfried, rest his soul. Yeah. Again, I'm an atheist who likes religious imagery. Gilbert Gottfried completely kills it in this thing. So, but the only problem was we just came out with it too soon. So we're actually thinking about doing a follow-up, Can We Take a Joke 2 or something like that.
And I can add about comedy because so when I applied to graduate school, I actually thought that I was going to study humor because when I didn't know what I was going to do with my life, I briefly thought that I might be either a comedian or a comedy writer. But it was just like a few months, and then I realized I don't have the guts to do it. So I chickened out. I said, those who can't tell jokes study jokes. So I thought I'd go to graduate school and get a PhD in humor.
I wrote a spec script for Friends.
How'd it do?
We didn't sell it.
So we both ended up in the right line of work. But I learned a little bit about the psychology of humor. And Freud wrote a book, Jokes in the Relation to the Unconscious, and this is one of his most readable and sort of reasonable books. And he makes the point that any really funny joke has either sex or aggression. Yeah. So there are jokes that have no sex or aggression. I'll tell you one. What did the hot dog vendor say to the Buddha? He said, "Make me one with everything." Okay. I think about that. Okay, but notice the reaction. Nobody really laughed, right? It was like, there's a bit of a groan. Applaud. You applaud. But right. So this is Freud's point, that you can have clever jokes, but to get real laughter, to get a real, it has to have sex or aggression in it, he said. And that's like part of normal society. And normal people have conflicts, and normal people and normal children tease each other, especially boys have to tease each other. So humor is woven, it has huge numbers of social functions. It's an essential part of society. But what happened the day that someone decreed that it's impact, not intent? That it doesn't matter what you meant. It doesn't matter if it's a joke. If a member of these 7 groups was harmed by it, then it's a prosecutable offense. We can go to the bias response team. You have to say you apologize for the pain. The pain that you've caused, that's the formula. It's the Maoist formula. I apologize for the pain I've caused. And so what happens when humor is now subject to anyone taking offense means there's only one stable position. If you think about this as like a complex society, it's like a complex dynamical system with only a couple of stable equilibria. Actually, so there are 2. There are only 2 stable equilibria. One is complete humorlessness. But how about no jokes ever? And that's what universities are turning into. There used to be jokes at conferences. It used to be academically playful. It's really fun to be a professor.
And playfulness is so rich for actually good ideas. Yeah. We've lost some. What I think is really interesting, I feel like there's a deep human instinct. What I felt like was happening partially in social media is like, okay, who am I allowed to hate? Because this very aggression that you're talking about, I feel like, it's everywhere. That essentially we figured out a way to sort of figure out ways to demonize each other in a way that is actually briefly satisfying, but destroys lives and gets you no closer to the truth. And that's kind of what I was getting at with the 1521 thing. The printing press eventually actually had incredible benefits, but we're definitely not there yet.
Something a line the comedian said in that documentary is, he said that the comedian's purpose is to find the line and to intentionally go over it. Yeah. It feels like that's the last bastion in society where we can do that, right? Because everyone's trying to find the line and then call the mob on the phone. Look for the line and then call the mob, as opposed to their profession is to find the line and see how they can go over in a way that makes people laugh. Maybe that's all we have left in society, is comedians.
Yeah, what I said is it's not that everyone's trying to call, it's that 5% or 3% are. And the rest of us, the middle 80% of the country, or whatever you would say, the middle 80% of the country is really quite reasonable. This is a really important rule. Wherever you go, almost everybody's reasonable. But what's changed is that with social media creating this viral dynamic, it's all about the change in dynamics. Actually, Sean Stevens and I wrote a series of articles at Heterodox Academy on the new dynamic that social media made possible. So don't lose your faith in humanity. Just be upset about the crazy system that humans are now in that makes us have to live more humorless lives.
Yeah, and on that note, in terms of not losing your faith in Gen Z as well, I think our squeakiest wheels are ridiculously squeaky. But if you look at the percentage of people across different generations and their opinions on cancel culture, overwhelmingly, the most negative opinion on cancel culture is Gen Z because they came of age in it and they just have the tyranny of the minority that is so loud. But there are so many of us who are looking around and seeing their friends dropping like flies and know that there's something wrong about this.
Hey everyone, let me take a moment to talk about an air purifier I really like called Air Doctor. I'm a real nerd about air quality, and I do a lot of research on air purifiers, and I gotta say I'm really impressed with this one. According to the EPA, indoor air can be 2 to 5 times more polluted than outdoor air, and in some cases it can be 100 times more polluted. That's a problem, since a 2020 report found that nearly half of the population in the US, almost 165 million people, are living in areas with unhealthy levels of ozone or air pollution. Let Air Doctor filter out dangerous contaminants and allergens so your lungs don't have to. Air Doctor uses a ultra HEPA filter that's been independently tested to remove 99.99% of tested bacteria and viruses. Allergens can vary in size, but the average pollen size is about 25 microns. And Air Doctor virtually removes 100% of particles as small as 0.003 microns in size. An Air Doctor 3000 is a purifier powerful enough to circulate the air 4 times per hour in a 638 plus square foot room. Air Doctor features whisper jet fans that are 30% quieter than the fans found in ordinary air purifiers. So it's no wonder Air Doctor has been covered by media outlets including CNN, Money, ABC, and more. Personally, I really like how quiet it is while I'm sleeping, and how I wake up refreshed and without my normal congestion. Believe me, I've gone through a lot of air purifiers, and this is one of the best I've ever tried. I'm super sensitive to dust mites, and Air Doctor appears to take a lot of the dust mites away from my room while I'm sleeping. Air Doctor comes with a no questions asked 30-day money-back guarantee, so if you don't love it, just send it back for a refund minus shipping. So head to airdoctorpro.com and use promo code PSYCH, and depending on the model, you'll receive up to 40% off. You're saving up to 40% off. Lock this special offer in by going to airdoctorpro.com and use promo code PSYCH. Okay, now back to the show.
A question that you probably get a lot, Greg, being a part of FIRE and this organization that's an advocate of free speech, is the line between free speech and hate speech. I've been wanting to discuss this with you for a while.
Sure, yeah.
Where do we have clear ideas where that line is anymore?
Yeah. Well, we get this a lot, and hate speech is one of those things that really can't be defined without subjectivity. And it's the bedrock principle. And a lot of times people point out, like in Europe, they have hate speech laws, and they think our law is so different. The primary difference is simply this, partially because we are a genuinely pluralistic society. We have people with lots of different ways of talking, lots of different beliefs. The bedrock principle in First Amendment law is you can't ban something simply because it's offensive. And it's kind of funny. I read this book. Stanley Fish is this longtime critic of the First Amendment. He actually wrote a book called "There's No Such Thing as Free Speech and It's a Good Thing Too." And I read it, and it's kind of like, okay, you're actually pointing out that there are some exceptions to the First Amendment, and therefore it's all arbitrary, is what he jumps to, which is just a silly point of view. Even Stanley Fish is like, you can't actually define hate speech. It's too subjective. And I have to say, on campus, hate speech was a concept that was originally introduced in about the 1970s, became popular enough in the 1980s that universities introduced speech codes. Those speech codes got defeated in court. They became racial and sexual harassment policies. and they are abused all the time. I mean, like it's completely nuts, like how often people get in trouble with this. But to tell you like how bad the free speech situation is at the moment, just this past 2 weeks, there was an event at UC Davis that was actually trying to show that movie by Matt Walsh. You know, like
What is a Woman? Yeah.
You know, offensive to some people, absolutely. But students actually showed up with bags of shit and started throwing them at
Was
people.
Matt throwing it at Matt Walsh?
What's that?
Were they throwing that?
No, just at students who are hosting.
Students?
Yeah.
Hosting
sure.
at fellow students?
Yeah.
But that's not hate speech.
What's that? No,
That's hate.
what I'm saying is, like,
Throwing.
I'm talking about like how bad the situation has gotten for free speech on campus. And my overall take on a lot of like the philosophical part that's left out of the overly academic way of looking at freedom of speech is very simple. It's always valuable to know what people really think, full stop. And it's especially true when they think challenging, difficult things. We are living in a fantasy land if we think we're not better off knowing, like, someone raises their hand and tells me I'm a Nazi, I'm like, oh, thank God, I know that now. I'm not going to be friends with you.
Yes, and
You're not allowed to voice what you think.
get the microphone here.
Sorry. It's
I completely agree. I'm going to do a yes and as they do in improv.
Sure, yeah.
But you know, what about? It doesn't mean we necessarily have to amplify the assholes. You know, like I agree with everything you just said.
Yeah.
You know, but once we start normalizing, you know, with like Kanye West going and all these things being like, fuck Jews, right? Like, and it's like, okay, well, you know, can we stop amplifying that?
Yeah.
You know, it's like, and I'm not saying like no free speech. I'm not saying like everyone shut down the microphone.
Yeah.
But I do think there's some things like decorum, certain things in society, some ideas.
So here's I think the one place where I'll disagree with Greg, and it's kind of dangerous here with all these people from FIRE and all my libertarian friends here. But I actually think free speech is not the crucial idea on campus. That is, what I think we need to do is for each institution, look at what is its telos, what is its purpose, what is its function, and once you have that clear, then you say, what are the proper norms around speech that would help it meet its telos?
Yeah.
So I'm thank God I live in a country where we have the First Amendment, and so we're talking about what the government can do. I'm totally with you.
Yeah.
But the arguments on campus about free speech and the First Amendment, I think, don't quite hit the mark. Because I think what we need is free inquiry.
Yeah.
We have to have the ability for people to say what they think, and for people to feel confident questioning it. But here, intent is actually important, because if a student is challenging something with the intent of challenging them, of whatever they say should be allowed. But if but in this modern environment allows for trolling, it allows for all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And so, if Milo Yiannopoulos wants to come and troll, I mean, I think students should go, and I think he actually is an interesting person to listen to. But should a person be able to do that in class?
Yeah.
Should there be trolling in class? Like, no. So maybe a misunderstanding, but I think that the First Amendment is not exactly what we need to be talking about on campus.
Oh no, and it's not. But this is the disagreement with Robert Post, who's a scholar at Yale, with Stanley Fish, is that they just try to make there's like this free speech thing, and then there's like freedom of inquiry over here. And I think that's just wrong. I think free speech is the big circle that includes things like academic freedom that has somewhat different rules. Jonathan Rauch wrote this incredible book called Kindly Inquisitors that talks about liberal science. And that's actually a smaller sort of circle, like within freedom of speech. But there's this idea that kind of like free speech, First Amendment can't actually cope with what's going on campus. Meanwhile, if you look at the case law, they actually make these distinctions every day quite well. Nobody's arguing that someone can stand up in class and shout down their professor. The professor controls the class. They have the freedom to grade. We've adapted our thinking on freedom of speech that is appropriate on campus. And I do think that trying to really distinguish freedom of speech from academic freedom and free inquiry is a mistake.
Huh.
Okay.
But I do like the idea. I do think there's something to the phrase "good faith" versus bad faith, and I think that's what I'm with John here. You know when you're talking to an asshole, like you know it, right? Maybe you don't
agree
always
with
know.
that.
But like
a lot of times,
maybe not always.
People are tricked all the time.
But like
and sometimes
statistically,
great people seem like
significantly,
assholes. How many people you met the first time that you were like, oh my god, this guy's an asshole?
No, like
who later became great
99%
friends.
of them, all that I became friends with. That's a good point. Sometimes they're fun. Sometimes they're fun. But that's a good point. But I do think we need more good faith debates and disagreements in our society today, and less bad faith ones.
Oh yeah, and that's a major point. Like one of the things that we're talking about canceling the American mind is what we call the rhetorical fortresses. That essentially there's a right-wing rhetorical fortress that's like you don't need to listen to liberals, experts, or people who bash Trump. But on the left, since it was partially grown out of academia, it's just layer after layer of ad hominem and distractions and things that aren't actually arguments at all. They don't actually get to the. You never actually have to get to the actual argument someone's making. And what we're pointing out is cancel culture is just one part of the way that we distort the way we argue, and that we can actually stop. We can actually call bullshit sometimes when people are just relying on snark to try to dismiss an argument. It's like, no, we need to create spaces where people can address the argument and actually in a truth-seeking manner, not just score social points.
Absolutely, and I also am worried about the algorithms.
Sure.
The social media algorithms are solving for assholery. The X that they're solving for is like how much divisiveness is there, how many shares in a negative way, how much and that's what gets amplified. So that's what I say when I think we can have some control over what gets amplified by changing those algorithms. Right?
Yeah, I think a lot about kind of with Twitter. It's interesting. There's a lot of debate about anonymity, for example. Whether or not you should allow it. And I think that you should allow it, particularly because Twitter is global, but I think there should be streams within it where it's basically, if you want to participate in this, in this debate, you actually have to be a real person with a reputation on the line. And there has to be rules, because I do actually think you could create, and I think I'm still a little hopeful that we will figure out a way to use the communication with billions of people with a billion different lives to actually do better disconfirmation.
There's a very simple way to do a lot of what I think we need to do, which is people seem to think either you're using your real name or you're anonymous, and there's a gigantic place in the middle called authentication.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It just means that in order, look, we take an Uber, we don't know the person's name, we just know their first name, but the company knows their name.
Yep.
And if they cheat us, then they're in trouble. And so imagine if Twitter followed up on Musk tweeted, authenticate all humans.
Yeah.
Now, so what if, in order to open an account on Twitter or Facebook, you have to first get passed out to another company, whether it's Clear or whether there's all kinds of things using crypto, blockchain. You just get passed out to some other way of authenticating that you're a real person. Now, I think we need to do age gating. I think we're going to have to get to age gating soon. But the people who are then actually on the platform are real people who, if they make death threats or rape threats, the company can kick them off, and they can't just get back on.
They should be prosecuted. We've under-prosecuted actual threats.
Yeah. So I think this is the biggest reform we can make to make social media less destructive of everything. Is just have platforms requiring authentication before you can participate with a fake name.
But there is a problem. It's the international audience, and
why's that problem?
Because you'd actually have to give your name in Turkey, and basically
but you're not giving it to the government. You'd be giving it to there are already dozens of ways to do this, and some will be evolved that could be completely unhackable. Because all Twitter has to know is not your name. They just have to know, yes, this account, this person checked out by someone else. That's all you need.
Yeah, on the necessity of having anonymity if you're a citizen of China, Russia, or Turkey, for example.
You'd be anonymous. Yeah. You would still be anonymous, but you can still be authenticated.
Yeah.
And even if you're worried about edge cases of some people, we're past the point where we can say, you know what? We need one platform where everyone can be on it. And if that means there's no authentication and most people are bots and assholes, well, we need to do that because there's some dissidents in China.
Yeah.
What a horrible thing to get to the end of your life and for some god or someone to say, you've spent half of your life arguing with bots.
Yeah.
Entirely. That would freaking suck. If it was revealed, right, that half of your arguments were actually with bots.
I kind of think the solution to a degree is one that doesn't have the same expectations, just a fundamentally different social media platform if we want to argue towards truth.
Love that. I actually think this would be a great time to have a little Q&A.
Woo!
And I want to tell you how we're doing it. So you can line up. This is the microphone for the Q&A. So if you can just line up if you wanted to ask a question, and we're happy to answer your questions. That's not a question. How dare you? It's not face as a question. Don't be shy. Do you have a question? Hello! Please say your name if you'd like to.
I like your sweater.
Thank you very much.
It was a cardigan. Sorry. It is a cardigan.
Hi, my name's Grant. So I work in higher education. So I have two questions, if that's okay. I'll make one quick, one's a little longer. So I actually assigned the first chapter of Coddling at the American Mind at both universities that I've taught at in the past. One is a public institution, one's a private institution.
Oh, how'd it go?
At the public institution, it's received very well. At the private institution, there's a lot more initial pushback without actually reading the text. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts about that. The demographics are very different. At the public institution, it's lower socioeconomic background.
Absolutely.
Students, private institution, more wealthy background. Second question is, what do you recommend for somebody who is young and navigating this space in higher education who's not tenured yet?
Okay, I'll take the first one. And then John can take the second one about tenure. The class differences are profound. And I end up sounding like a Marxist a lot, but I was definitely really horrified when I got to Stanford. I mean, I was working since I was 11. I worked at Burlington Goat Factory, Sparrows, and I actually did construction. And I show up at this place where I felt like people had a hard time in my human rights classes. These are high IQ people, but they seem to think that sort of like rich, white, liberal, or progressive values were kind of universal truths. And it was very strange to constantly be like, you guys know nothing about what the actual rest of the world looks like. Meanwhile, you know, my dad's Russian, he grew up in Yugoslavia, my mom's Irish, she grew up in Britain, I spent a lot of time abroad. It just seems so incredibly simplistic and silly. And this is not nearly as bad at public school. If you have actual working class kids, if you have a public school with genuine diversity, it tends to make this all seem kind of silly and weird. So it's always the case that we still see bad free speech cases at public universities, but they're mostly about abuses of power. They're about Dean Wormer. But in higher ed, it's become this like weird, incubator of this very sort of like, honestly, like, I was at one of these schools, what was it? I forget, but it was one of like it was like a finishing school, and I was pointing out, it's like, guys, you're acting like the Victorians that we used to make fun of. You're acting like the upper class people, but you just have different norms that you think are progressive. It's a major difference between schools.
The second question, what's your field?
English.
Sorry.
Have you considered not English?
So I mean, what I would say is, first, here's the good thing. When there's incredible pressures for orthodoxy, what that means is in the vast realm of things that could be studied, almost like by an electromagnetic force, everyone concentrates in a certain area and they leave almost everything empty. And this sort of happened to me by accident. I used to be on the left and I was studying moral psychology and I was trying to help the Democrats stop losing. And once I started like reading good conservative libertarian writing, I was like, oh wow, there's all these amazing ideas out there that I never knew. And it turned out I had the whole field to myself. Nobody else was raising in these areas. Now, I already had tenure by that time, so it was easy and I could take some risks. You can't. So, but we live in a different world now where if you love ideas, you don't just have one avenue to a tenure track and then tenured position. In fact, there are a lot of people in this room already who are intellectuals who are not on the tenure track because things are really opening up. There's a really good article I just read, somebody sent it to me in tablet like today or something, about how the intellectuals used to not be at universities. And it's just
absolutely, yeah.
It's just the baby boom people, they avoiding the draft, whatever it was, they all moved into universities. But I think we have to see that was a temporary period. And guess what? Universities are doing a terrible job of curating public intellectuals.
Absolutely.
So if you have good ideas, if you have, and remember, the humanities, like, we used to love the humanities because it was about being human. And now it's not, and so nobody's majoring in it anymore. That means there's a huge market for you. So I think there is space opening up for public intellectuals who got some academic training and then were kicked off the ranch and then found, like the first humans into North America. Like, you're going to have huge megafauna to slay. It's going to be great. Maybe.
All right, thank you so much.
Hello, friends.
Hello. This is Angel Eduardo.
I wanted to ask you on the free speech thing. I argue about free speech a lot.
Yeah.
And one thing that I get a lot is this kind of what I would call the mind virus argument.
Oh, that's the right way.
Yeah. Which is kind of
Elon Musk uses that phrase. Right?
Well, yeah, but I think he means it differently. This is the kind of thing where someone will say, oh, you know, this Joe Rogan had this person on his podcast, and it was awful, and we need to make sure he doesn't have a podcast anymore because he had this person on. And I say, well, how do you know that this person said all these terrible things? And they said, well, I watched the entire podcast. And I said, but are you okay? You heard all these ideas. And then they go, yeah, I'm fine. But all these idiots.
Someone over there,
Right, so I'm just curious. I'm curious what you guys think about that particular argument.
I'm tempted to make my next book something called Fight the Guardians, which is about like people who actually see Plato's Republic and see the Guardian class, who you know, people aren't real, but the ideas are real, and we're the only ones who know it, and it should be a dictatorship of the smart, dangerous people. And I think that there is so much elitism in this. There's so much kind of like, oh, we care about disadvantaged people, but there's, you know, basically then treat them like they're dumb and evil, like they're stupid and evil people. And so, yeah, any elitism, you know, to a degree, is not as dangerous when it's not tied to authoritarianism. But both on the right and the left, you know, there is this rise of kind of like we are the smartest, and these other people are dumb, and we have to take over. It's all. It's not thinking like people in a free society where we're supposed to be equal democratic citizens.
It's a cultish mentality.
It's what?
It's a cultish mentality.
It's a cultish mentality.
Cultish mentality. Yeah.
Thank you, Angel.
Hi, my name is Paul.
Hello, Paul.
I'm going to give a little backstory just because if I don't, then you're going to all boo me because I'm basically an out-group just based on this conversation. I work in diversity and inclusion.
Welcome.
Okay, so my background's in neuroscience
These things
research.
need not be at odds, my friend. These things need not be at odds.
So I work in diversity and inclusion today. I started off in neuroscience research, worked at Stanford, graduate school, Columbia, all that jazz. Ended up moving to the applied side of human sciences, which naturally today means you're going to work in diversity and inclusion if you're serving companies. And I consult with chief diversity officers. It's basically like therapy sessions. The average tenure for a chief diversity officer is around 1.5 years max. And what's astonishing to me is I use your book all the time. I use Woke Inc. I use The Parasitic Mind, The Diversity Delusion, because I'm trying to restore confidence in what this was before the Me Too movement, the rise of Black Lives Matter. Like the heart of D&I was fundamentally about transcending our differences in the spirit of fairness and justice.
Oh man!
We decided to overrate. What I want to know, obviously, the tremendous fan. I already know Scott because he did a podcast with us a while ago. But I want to know, like, there's this war, right? Obviously, D&I was ideologically captured by the liberal left.
Yeah.
And it, you know,
I mean the illiberal left.
the illiberal left.
Yeah.
At a time of unprecedented social division and distrust, right? So we're dealing with that. How do we restore a movement that actually has a pretty good cause, right? At the end of the day, no one chose to be white, no one chose to be black. We want a fair world.
Yeah.
And this movement, to me, it's at the point where it needs a rebrand, right?
Yep. Really refreshing.
I just want to say, awesome question.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. So I recently finally decided what I am. That is because in terms of you know, coming out.
You sure you want to do this, Sean?
Yeah.
We talked about this the other day.
Politically, okay, here goes. Politically, I am an anti-identitarian, and what I mean by that is, you know, so when I was born in 1963, you know, that was 100 years after the Emancipation Proclamation took effect. In that 100 years, how much progress? Like some, but not 100 years worth of progress. And then you go from 1963 to 1973, how much progress on civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, 73 to 83, 90, each decade, on every possible front you could care about in social justice, incredible progress, all the way to 2013, when our first black president was just re-elected, when gay marriage proposals passed everywhere, and it was about to become the law of the land. So I used to be on the left, and you know, everything you care about with rights and diversity and inclusion was making incredible progress. So if you're in that space in 2013, you should be saying, yay, America, whatever it is that we've been doing, let's keep doing it. But instead, because of these changes in social media that allowed little viruses nurtured in a few English departments and identity departments, they spread out and they took over universities and then from there elsewhere, even though most people don't believe it. So I really am coming to see that the issue is not left-right. The issue is, are you an American who believes that in this amazing polyglot, large, diverse nation, we should be continuing to make identity matter less? Or do you believe that we should stop what we were doing up to 2013 and say, how about we make identity be everything? How about that? How's that going to work out? Okay, and so I think we have to all unite. We could all unite in saying, like, you know, this identitarianism is a bad thing. Of course, you're free to be, you know, Jewish or Italian or Chinese or gay or anything you want. Of course.
All of the above.
I'm free to be Italian.
Free to be. Well, you can identify as one. Well, anyway, so that's my answer. But I'd love to hear back from you. What do you think about?
Well, one, I agree 100%. Scott, actually, I just did a talk with a bunch of corporate executives last Wednesday, and I used Scott's artwork to cap it off, basically self-transcendence. It's like, hey, if we really recognize self-transcendence. Brian's book's up, Transcendence.
Well, my book of the month.
Fantastic. No, but I agree. What I'm finding is that there is such a level of just kind of the people that are in D&I that were there before all this.
Yeah.
That's one camp. And then there's the group of people who were quickly, reactively promoted into a role absent any previous understanding of this field.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, the fact that it's become very weaponized.
So
I don't know how to, like, it used to be diversity, then it was diversity and inclusion, then diversity, equity, inclusion, then diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. All you need to add is an N word, and you could call it the Biden movement. And so it's just ridiculous. It's become really insane. And what I'm struggling with is how do you regain the reins for something that's gone so far off the rails to the point where there's people who believe in it and its worst facets, unconscious bias training, all that, its worst facets with such conviction at the highest levels of corporations and at the highest levels of media and at the highest levels of academia. Every single area of our information ecosystem.
Yeah.
You know, there's a book there, by the way.
So we believe what you're saying so much. We actually incubated. She was actually in Can't We Take a Joke? Kareth Foster has this program for actually getting people to talk to each other, like each other, become friends, take themselves a little less seriously, like something that will actually leave people feeling closer. Chloe has a great program. I think we need to innovate in the DEI space exactly in the way you're saying. Actually, believe it or not, like one of my best friends is a DEI person, you know, and I think that there is an effort afoot to kind of restore it to something that actually brings people together as opposed to divide.
And in the business world, companies actually have to ultimately make money and be successful. Universities don't. And so there's no sign of a pendulum swing in the academic space, but there is clear movement in the corporate space. Yeah. And so you can't beat something with nothing. If there are better alternatives, and several executives have said to me, if someone would come up with a kind of diversity training that actually worked, we'd all do it. But so one thing I'd suggest is whenever somebody's pushing something, say, what's the evidence for that? Is there evidence that this works? Before we make people spend time and money, is there evidence? Because there never is. So that might be one strategy to sort of stall until other positive strategies can come in.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
What were you doing?
Ricky, I saw you wanted to say something. Did you?
I was just going to add that I think there might be like a logical short-circuiting of the entire, it was identity politics and then intersectional identity politics. And I think because my generation is so diverse and fits into so many Venn diagrams, when you're saying this is my sexuality and this is my race and this is my gender, and you're layering it over and over and over, and it's not just about one immutable characteristic, the ultimate argument that you're making is that I'm an individual and I'm more complex than these groups. And so I think Gen Z and our demographical diversity might just short circuit that like identity politics instinct.
Yeah. I'm glad I asked you. Hey, welcome.
Thanks for a wonderful panel.
Oh yeah, I got to talk microphone.
You can say that again to the microphone.
Say the wonderful part again.
Yeah, say that again.
Thank you so much for a wonderful meeting. I really appreciate what you
thanks for being here.
I so appreciate what you just said at the end, which is, right, maybe we all just need to read more books. Okay? So I'm sorry, I'm a higher education person. But I find that one of the things I notice in classes as I teach.
What's your field?
I teach 18th and 19th century. My research field is 18th and 19th century Spain and Europe.
I love it.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah. But my teaching is Spanish in general, like middle to upper level Spanish in a large public university, R1. So one of the ways that I tend to get around this kind of polarization in class, and I think that this is the first thing, and then I have another question too. So the very first quick thing is, one aspect is the personality of the teacher, the moral commitment of the teacher, or the moral commitment and the personality of student or parents or families who seek higher education. So I'm only talking about higher education here. But then another aspect is why people are seeking higher education.
Can you
and,
hear?
What I want
I gotta get rid of my
Another aspect, why people seek higher education. People seek higher education and they take themselves into terrible debt often for it, right?
Yeah.
Debt, I've asked my students, what is the thing that you're most concerned about? And it's their loans.
Yeah.
Okay? It's their loans. So this is not, though, something that has to do with liberal, conservative, canceling.
It's about hyper-bureaucratization.
So, but it's about a lot of things. So one of the things that I'm wondering about, and it's something that I'm not demanding a particular kind of language for discussing, but one of the things I'm wondering about is the role, and I say this carefully, okay? I say this carefully. I'm not trying to be it's hard to talk about money, and it's hard to talk about finance, and it's hard to talk about the fact that when we see TV, for example, when we see something that is on Instagram, when we see anything that is presented in a university, there's a lot of money behind that. And when you see things on television in particular, nothing gets before the screen unless it is carefully scripted, groomed, makeup, and whatever. So we have a line from, as individuals, whether we go to higher education or not, what is our moral? But I don't want to use the word capitalism. I don't want to use the word money. I mean, you talk about how people get canceled. So I get canceled. I feel like I get canceled if I want to bring up, how do we talk about the influence of corporate control over our media? So let's be real. We have platforms here. We have billionaires who, and they have agendas.
I'll take, So
they have spreadsheets and agendas.
Okay, so I'll take this in part because of morality and also in part because this is my sister Rebecca,
and they
who is a professor at Ohio State.
What a curveball that was! I didn't know that.
You got twice the height.
Whoa!
So Rebecca and I, so Rebecca. Okay. So Rebecca is a true liberal. She's very hold on. She's always been on the left. But she also saw very clearly, I mean, in fact, one of the first places I heard about cancel culture was you on your job talks in the 90s. The fact that she studied Madrid was like, oh, you shouldn't study Madrid. You need to study the marginalized, the margins. Like,
so the oppressed areas.
Yeah.
You see?
So okay. So I think what you're pointing out is that there are a lot of dynamics of conflict that corrupt or damage what we do on campus, and money, and
monetize.
Yes. So I think we can. We mentioned this in the book. We have a chapter on bureaucratization.
Actually.
So when universities have evolved over such a long period. But in the 80s, they became much more corporate, much more corporatized. We got that we call multiversities.
Yeah, multiversities of the 60s, I do.
So, but I just want to question whether if you raise that, will you be shamed and mobbed and fired?
Yeah.
Or will you just be like either dismissed or someone will disagree with you? Because if not, then it's not really a cancel culture.
What I don't hear you all addressing, and I know that
I was about to.
So, okay,
The thing that I find frustrating, and it's not exactly corporatism. It's a weird combination of incentives, and I don't really get why there isn't more just outright anger at the fact that higher education has acted like a cartel.
Thank you.
They raised their money together. They have overwhelmingly increased the bureaucratization. That's what you're paying for. You're not paying for more and better professors. You're paying for more administrators.
You're paying for more deans.
Meanwhile, this is putting you in debt for the rest of your life. We've got to break this system.
It's corporate people.
University of Austin will do that.
But I'm not talking about capitalism. How do we discuss the fact that, like, for example, 19th century corporations. Greg, you would know about this. 19th century corporations.
Okay, actually, we'd have to,
Jonathan's sister, everyone! Rebecca, woo!
Twice.
Jonathan, this is one of the greatest psychologists of our generation staying right here, Jonathan Schooler. Woo! I just want to say he's had a huge impact on my own work on daydreaming and mind wandering. So it's
Thank you.
Yeah.
This was really, really stimulating. And I'm John. I think I heard you saying that you think we should really take social media out of the hands of 13, whatever was the 11, 13.
We need to delay it to 16.
Yeah. So I'm wondering. I mean, I'm putting myself in the shoes of one of those adolescents and imagining not being happy about having that restriction and feeling like this is maybe it's not coddling, but it's a kind of coddling. It's like you are not mature enough to be able to handle this material.
Yeah.
And so I'm just questioning, like, put yourself.
Isn't that a
Imagine you were. Isn't that a contradiction? And does that really sit well with you?
Oh, it sits so well with me. So here's why. So when you and I were young, high school kids smoked. And you could get cigarettes in a vending machine. And I'm sure people said, like, well, what are you going to do? Ban vending machines? Like, of course, kids are going to get cigarettes. But eventually we realized, you know what? We kind of have to ban vending machines. And we have to kind of try to stop this from children. The basic argument in the coddling wasn't social media is destroying them. It's the fact that they are overprotected and not given life experience. What kids need is to be out unsupervised. America is a great experiment in self-governance, but yet we never let kids be self-governing. Is Lenore Skenazy here? I thought she was on the list somewhere.
Yeah.
Is Lenore here? I don't know. Anyway, yes, Let Grow. Go to letgrow.com, support us. Anyway, my point is, kids need to be out having real interactions and adventures and getting into trouble and getting out of trouble and getting lost and getting... They need to do all that stuff. As soon as they get a phone, and especially with social media, they go out, they sit there, and they're on the phone. They literally don't play. So this, I believe, is inhibiting development. It's almost like they have emotional scurvy, and as long as they have a phone with social media, that's the end of childhood. That's the end of experience. So yes, it seems superficially like a contradiction, but if they're going to have experience, we have to delay social media until it's less damaging. Now that there's evidence that it's especially damaging for 11 to 13-year-old girls, yep, I think it's in the class of cigarettes.
What about riding bicycles and doing other things?
Not in the class of cigarettes. Riding, the danger there is trivial. What would you say about 1 in 4 girls being damaged? Is that a lot or a little? I mean, most of them aren't damaged. So, whereas bicycles, look, if bicycles were killing 1/4 or severely maiming 1/4 of the children who rode them, I would say the same about bicycles. But bicycles give them the experience. Bicycles give them the independence to get away from adults and have adventures.
Yeah. Thank you.
We have time for one more short question. Thanks.
So I was going to apply for a job, open science librarian at NYU, which required a diversity statement.
I love librarians.
I could not, having been to Heterodox Academy Conference, I could not bring myself to write it. But much more significantly, at University of California, Berkeley, they require like very elaborate statements that are basically political confessions. Yeah. So what do we do about these?
Yeah, no, I'll take that. So we have, I mentioned the research team. I used to kind of pretend to be fire social scientist because I was really interested in things like psychology. And then finally we started getting like really great employees. Pamela Peresky, for example, was a chief researcher for a while. But we now have people like Sean Stevens, and we just had someone, Comey Frey, who's amazing. But we just added someone named Nate Honeycutt, and he actually did research. He simulated the situation. He actually got, panels of administrators and professors to review DEI statements, because the claim is that you can talk about, listen, we're not, this isn't a political litmus test. You can talk about viewpoint diversity. You can talk about religious diversity. You can talk about economic diversity. You don't have to talk about just the sort of like liberal identitarian line on this. And he did the experiment. And you absolutely have to talk about the identitarian line. It is absolutely a political litmus test. And to me, this is insane, because we already have a tiny number of conservatives in higher ed to begin with. They have multiple hoops they have to jump through. The situation is actually getting worse. There are secret tribunals, the possibility of cancellation. And on top of that, someone actually looked out at higher ed and said, you know what? There's too much intellectual diversity here. We need a political litmus test. So we're figuring out ways to fight it. Well, we're actually considering litigating it. There's different forms of potential legislation against it, but it is a political litmus test.
Excellent.
Which is wrong.
I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. A couple announcements. One, if you liked what you heard today, please subscribe to the Psychology Podcast. Another thing is, please leave at that exit today. And don't come, if you want to talk to us, like don't come up. There's a show right after this, so let's be respectful. We will be outside if you want to talk to us for a couple seconds, not for the whole evening. And finally, let's just give a big round of applause to our amazing guests today. Thanks, everyone. Cue the outro music. There it is. That's the outro.